Hi, everybody. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us at our fourth resiliency planning webinar. This is the fourth in a series of resiliency planning webinars that HSC, with the help of Annie Grunwald and Rebecca Hansen, have created. And we hope you find this helpful in your emergency planning efforts. So without further ado, Annie, please take it away.
Thank you so much, Jason. So welcome, everyone. As you can see, the title of this presentation is Incident Management. And we're going to talk about what that means in a moment. But before we do, just want to give you a sense of the big picture if you haven't seen any of the other webinars. So HSC, as Jason mentioned, has some great tools up on the website now. An emergency management plan template with appendices, with different tools, as well as an instruction guide we're calling the toolkit. And then to complement that and support your planning efforts, we also have this webinar series. And for this first fiscal year, we have 4 of them that we have presented. This is the last one in this first series. The first one was called Anatomy of a Well-Planned for Disaster. It's great for folks that don't have much background in emergency management. It also focuses emergency management in a human services organization. So if you have new staff that are coming on and you'd like them to get a good sense of the language, what it means, the cycle of emergency management, is a great one to start with. The second of these webinars, just pull up my, of the webinars is I am going to get my pointer out. Here we go. Okay, so we have the second of them is concentrating on all these materials over here. We're going through the template, we're going through all of the appendices to really give you a sense of, I'm a smaller organization. I'm an organization that focuses on this. How would you sort of adapt those materials for your organization? Really gives you a sense of what's there. The third webinar was really looking at, we're advocating you creating an actual program, an emergency management program that is embedded in your organization. So this is really talking about how you can do that. What are some of the strategies? That brings us to today, our incident management presentation. So what is incident management? What do we mean when we say that? Well, really, basically it's, okay, something happens, right, that disrupts your normal operations at your organizations. So incident management is all the things that you do that are going to facilitate your ability to do 3 things. Continue your mission and most important services, restore normal operations as quickly as you can, get back to what considered normal, and minimize the impact on your business operations, your staff, your clients, all of that. So that's what we're looking at. How would you do that? So what are we going to be talking about today? First thing is why a special kind of incident management and not your regular sort of management approach. And then we're going to look at a leadership structure that that you can use. We're going to talk about how do you turn that leadership structure on when something happens and you need your team. And then Rebecca is going to start looking at, then how do you manage your team through an actual long-term disaster where you're having to focus on continuity and recovery. We're going to look at our cycle in just a moment. And then de-escalation, how do you transition? And then how do you take everything that you learned and ensure that that's embedded in your planning documents, in your planning approach? So those of you who have seen other trainings that we've done, other webinars, you'll recognize this. This is the phases of emergency management, or what we call emergency management cycle. And different webinars are focusing on different phases or just different components. This is focusing on a component that kind of goes through continuity and recovery. So up here we have the planning that you're doing all of the time. Hopefully it's embedded in the organizations. You're meeting regularly, you're updating your plans, you're allowing all of your staff to be part of that. Something happens, you use your plans to respond to that emergency. And then let's say it's not done. It's not just a microwave, somebody burned the popcorn and you're back to normal operations. Maybe it's something more. There's flooding in the basement and there are a lot of things that are disrupting your organization. You're going to have to continue going during that disruption. So keeping your organization going when it's in a disrupted state and steering it towards recovery. How you do that is what we're going to talk about today. So you might be asking yourself, gosh, I have a perfectly good management structure. I've worked on it a lot, and we continue to revisit it. We have a table of organization, our leadership meets regularly, departments and programs have ways of setting goals, all of that. And to that I say, that's wonderful, congratulations. But when you have to remember that that structure was made for a particular kind of environment, right? Under specific conditions. So what I'm going to look at is the two environments, your business as usual environment and the environment where you're trying to recover from an incident, and see how those are different and why a different type of structure might work for you during that phase. So let's just take a look. So we have here on the left different aspects of managing your organization. And then we have the, here it talks about business as usual. I'm trying to get my pointer going here. Okay, there we go. Business as usual. So how you approach on an everyday basis. And in the blue is how that approach and environment changes. So if you can see, we'll just go through a few of these. So for staffing, your staffing is in flux, and some of you more than others. And I know you've had a lot of challenges, social service, human services organization over these past few years. But in general, it's in flux, but it's expected, and you have mechanisms to deal with that if you're not in an emergency state. During an emergency, there are all kinds of sudden impacts, and the impacts just keep changing. Maybe first it's folks can't get to your facility, and then it's the mental health impacts that may happen further down the line. So a lot of changes there. Client needs. You have a process of reviewing what those are, how they're changing over time. But again, controlled, there's something, that process that you can manage. During a major event, during recovery, they grow and they're changing often. They may be very different. You might have to approach it differently. You might not be able to present your programs in the way that you want to. Infrastructure, same thing. You could lose facilities. You could have all kinds of different supplies that you need. Look at PPE that all of a sudden everybody was grappling to find. And then the external environment is a big one. It's changing all the time too. So your needs are changing, your internal environment is changing, and the external environment is constantly changing. As we said, changes in transportation could be first, it's that, maybe then it continues the trash or the leftovers from disasters aren't, the sanitation is not being dealt with properly. So there are all kinds of external environmental effects that will continue to change. Look at the COVID environment, it was continually changing. Then your approach to goal setting, organizational priorities, again, you probably have a beautiful cycle where quarterly you look at goals, you do strategic planning every 3 or 4 years. Well, in disaster environments and recovery environments, you have to constantly reassess what's happening and change what your goals are, change what your priorities are. So that is the environment in which you're dealing with, and we can look at it. One of the big changes here is the big differences is the pace of change, right? So during business as usual, it's more controlled, longer term. During a major incident, during the recovery, during the continuity of that, it's changing very, very quickly. So what does that mean? Well, it means that you have to really adapt to that. So we would argue that most organizations can benefit from a slightly different structure that can deal with those changes. So an adjusted leadership team that meets more frequently, is more nimble, and it can respond to the very different, fast-changing environment of this disrupted state that you're in, where continuing your essential programs and getting back on your feet is your goal. So we're going to look at a sample. We, of course, have put together a sample, what we're calling incident management team. And this is something that is based on, some of you probably know, incident command system, this approach to managing emergencies created for emergency management, for emergency response organizations, where it's a very large event and you have teams coming from all over. So everyone had to really use the same system to manage emergencies. So they created this structure that highlights all the important things you have to think about during emergencies. So we took that, we adapted it to human services organizations. So you'll notice that, I mean, really the way to think about this is most positions will be filled by your leadership. It's not that different, but what they're going to be focusing on is going to be different during an incident. Okay, so let's just do a high-level review of this chart. So the incident manager, that is still your leader. It's likely going to be your CEO or somebody close, high up in the leadership structure. They are still steering your ship, right? But that ship is wobbly now. The water, there's lots of waves. Maybe there's damage in the ship. So they're going to be focusing on those things, how to steer that ship during this uncertain, unstabilized environment. The grade positions focus on areas that are specific to emergencies and disasters. We'll talk about those. And the blue, really, you'll recognize, you want to use titles that are close to how you divide your responsibilities normally. So this probably, you recognize some of these terms, maybe your structure is similar to this. So first, I want to talk about these boxes in gray. So what's different here is that the disaster environment creates a lot of safety issues, right? So this says we need to have someone who is constantly looking at safety. That is the priority, while other people are deciding, let's cancel this program, let's move this program over here. The safety person is looking at, well, maybe it's not safe to have people come on the subway right now because there are a lot of disruptions in it, or the roads aren't safe, or you're at your facility and part of it is damaged and there's construction going on there. They're making sure that the places you are using are safe while that is happening. The next position here, get my pointer to move, is liaison position. So this is when during emergencies, really a lot of the environment is being dictated and the recovery mechanisms are being dictated by public safety organizations or disaster recovery organizations. So you want to have somebody that is in tune with that, is keeping up with what's happening, either directly or indirectly with those organizations. So that's what this liaison position does. And then there's this special advisor position, which probably isn't different than you probably have advisors on your board, but this one is dictated, the particular kind of advisor is going to be dictated by what your needs are for the disaster. So depending on what it is, you might, so your team, your incident management team is going to be meeting frequently. So you want to look at your chart and think, who do we want at these meetings that's steering our ship through these turbulent times? So sometimes you might need somebody with legal experience or medical experience. Think of COVID, or I can think of the Legionnaire's disease outbreak where the water towers had a client, supportive housing client that responded to that event because they had some of their folks being sick and they were doing a big education campaign. So they brought somebody on to talk to them about the ramifications of Legionnaires and really how they should approach it. Mental health, the big one. IT, you might want always an IT advisor there. Recovery systems, someone to talk about, well, what are the systems that are available to us? Maybe there's some reimbursement programs and others, and there could be other things. The point is there might be some experts that you'd like to bring into a meeting or continually into your meetings to help inform your decisions. Now I want to take a look at this layer. So this is really the heart of how you're managing your organization, right? So first, let's take a look at programs. Yeah, well, that makes sense, right? You have, I'm sure, whole department or maybe departments dealing with programs, but what is it focusing on during disasters and incident in your incident management team? Well, it's about adapting your services, right? So it's about figuring out what critical services. Hopefully you have a plan that will give you some guidance as to what your critical services are, but during the event, you're really looking at and deciding what should go on, what needs to be suspended, what services need to be expanded. Operations, your department may be different. Maybe operations doesn't have human resources and facilities. The point is, these two pieces of this, the human resources, really going to be concentrating on staff needs and those changing needs. You may have a lot of policies that have to change, or are the policies that you have that staff aren't familiar with that you're going to have to communicate. You're thinking about equity in incident-related reassignments, ensuring that if you are asking people to really do some commitments that are outside of their realm and could be dangerous, or whatever it is, that you're compensating people, that you're training them, all of that. Addressing staffing shortages. And then the whole facilities, you're focusing on getting your facilities back, or maybe you're looking at getting an alternate facility that you have on board get up and going because your original facility is damaged, or trying to find alternate places. You're looking at your infrastructure, your IT communications, how to get that going again. So those are things that you're focusing on in programs and operations during an incident. These other three buckets, let's look at. So planning, all of you may not have a planning department. Some of you may have a strategic planning department that's always looking at helping the organization plan and move forward. But really, during an incident, when your team is meeting, You're looking at how are you managing this rapid pace of information collection, right? So you're having a lot of meetings, you're setting a lot of goals, you're having to implement those plans. So this person is really ensuring that you're able to do that, keeping track of what people said they were going to do. It's sort of project management responsibility as well. Finance and admin, same thing. You're dealing with the money and administration, but a lot of it is going to be keeping close tabs on your incident related expenses. Some of them you might be able to get reimbursements for, your insurance reimbursements. There might be things like the PPP that are available to you. There might be special grants, so you'd be working with development, ensuring. So this is everything about income reimbursements and allocations related to the incident. External affairs, again, your approach is how are we communicating what we're doing, who needs what information, how are we making sure that all of our messages that we're sending to all of our stakeholders are consistent with each other. So the same, but the focus is a little different. So now let's look at the titles. You'll notice we just had the realms of responsibility listed here. Well, what are you going to call these people? Well, you can really call them whatever you want. What a common terminology for ICS, and one that's used by a lot of organizations who adapt this structure, is you call the first person in charge the incident commander. I would argue, though, to call this incident manager, it's more apt for what social services and human services organizations are doing. So really that's what we call it in the team, your incident management system, and you have your incident manager. Your layer here, usually call this the safety officer, the liaison officer, and this layer are your chiefs, your program chief, planning chief, operations chief, and so on. Now, let's just talk about why or why not you might use those titles. So things to consider is you just want to make sure that your titles for emergencies are a little different than what you use for your everyday operations. So if you have a planning chief, your normal operations, let's go back. You don't want to have a planning chief in your incident management structure unless you call it incident program chief, incident planning chief. You want to make it clear to all of your staff that this team is different. They have slightly different responsibilities. The other reason you want to make sure that your titles are different, I'm going to go back to, there we go. The other consideration is that when we're going to talk about that you want to have more than one person in those emergency positions. So if somebody is gone, they can flip in. And so you don't want people thinking, well, that they have a different title, so are they actually managing this? Be very clear. If you're in this position during an incident, this is the title. So again, that who's in charge problem. One thing you want to consider if you're a local chapter or a component of a national or regional organization, that each organization is using the same titles, so you're consistent with each other, you can support each other. And then the only reason that you might want to use all the titles that ICS uses, Incident Command System, is if you are an inpatient medical facility, because many are required to use ICS, and most do because so they can support each other. And so if they need government to come in and support them during disasters, they're using a similar system. But if you have outpatient clinics, you can use whatever titles make sense to you. So now I just want to look a little bit about other considerations. Some of them we already talked about, but one thing I want to mention is that each box really represents responsibilities. We looked at that basic structure that most of you could probably adapt and use. But some of you, what you want to understand is that if you have a smaller organization, the same person can take on one or more roles. And we're going to look at that in a moment. And also you expand and contract as needed. If at the beginning of an event, the incident manager decides, let me just bring the programs person in here. It's something that could happen. I just want to have a couple meetings with them and we can decide whether we need additional people. You can do that. You can contract as the event goes on. Like I said, ideally, each position should be 2 or 3 deep. So you can make sure you're covering if people are on vacations where they really can't get notified, or maybe your policy is you're on vacation, or they're sick, or there was a sudden staff change and you don't have anybody in that position. So you want to make sure you have a couple of deep in there. And then you want to make sure you clearly articulate responsibilities of those team members. And at the end of the session, we're going to just show you the different tools. Rebecca will show the list of different tools we have in the template related to this training. And one of those is an appendix that has some sample language you can use. And you have to adapt it, of course, to what terms you decided to use or how you're setting up your structure. All right, so now I do want to look at some special circumstances. And one of those special circumstances is that many of you are smaller, right? Smaller organizations. Maybe you have 15 people or 20 people. And so what would your structure look like? Well, it could look like this. Now you might say, well, this looks exactly like the one you said could be used by a lot of organizations, kind of that medium sized. Yes, and the way we said that you might get around the fact that you're small is that what's great about this is that you have your clear realms of responsibilities, and it outlines the kinds of things that your organization will be dealing with during an event. But how you can address that is by assigning a person. Maybe your CEO is assigned to 2 positions. Maybe your program director is assigned to just 1, but you've got the director of communications as planning chief and external affairs chief. And that your CEO says, you know what, we're going to assign, if we need a liaison officer, we're going to assign it during the event. And that's a perfectly good way to go. Here you have 4 people that are part of your solid team, and you have some backups. You have an additional four teams. So this would work for maybe an organization of 15 to 20 or more. If you're very small, that's where you might say, we're going to use the same 3 people that get together during any event. And if one is absent, then we'll be 2 of us that will be kind of steering the ship. You still want to have in your plan, though, some things that you're going to be focusing on during a disaster. So you've thought that through, and you can look at each of those boxes and decide, oh, right, this applies to us. We do have to think about the human resources. We do have to think about that. So those are some ways you can adapt this to smaller organizations. Now, what if you're really big? Well, you can expand your chart. Perhaps you've got tremendous programs. Maybe you have 200 people working on programs alone. You might want 2 or 3 positions under here where you have assigned folks who, when something happens, they know that they might be called to be on your IMT. Maybe you have in your operations branch, you want a couple of different positions below that, separating human resources and infrastructure. Or maybe you want your development folks to be there at the table for when you're making decisions. Or maybe you want all of that. So again, you can adjust this. And as we said, you can expand and contract depending on the particular disaster. The last special circumstance I want to just highlight, many of you have residential facilities. So you want to make sure that your structure accounts for that, because really your folks at their sites, they're going to be dealing with the disruption, right? It might be the aftermath of a hurricane where maybe your folks, you can't get special food in, or you can't get medical care in the way you usually do, or you're managing the health needs that are exacerbated. So the sites are managing the incident with the sites. However, they're getting guidance and direction and support from headquarters. So your headquarters is really your incident coordinator. This is not saying you have to do it like this, but this is one way of just really making sure that that the two are speaking to each other and there's a real coordinated effort. Maybe just 1 or 2 sites are affected, or 3 sites are affected. This way you can, again, expand and contract. All right. So I think we've kind of talked about a lot of things about your structure. I hope convince you to at least consider an incident management team structure to really guide your disrupted ship through a disaster environment. So let's just go back and look at this. So we've been talking about, how do you plan, right? How do you get your team together? How do you decide who should be on your incident management team? Next, I'm going to just touch on, how are you activated, right? You've responded to the event if there was one, or you've been notified of an event and your team responds. How does that happen? And then Becky is going to continue to talk about, how do you steer your organization through that event to recovery? So activation. So the first thing is, someone becomes aware of an incident that has or could have significant impact on the organization. The incident manager is notified and briefed. So there's a lot in that sentence. So what that means is you have to have a method of people being aware that you have a team and knowing that they need to contact that team if something happens. So something happens on site, folks know that they need to contact the incident manager. If there is an event lurking, that's the second way it could be activated. Let's say there is word of a transit strike or a union strike for some of your union employees. Well, you want to start planning for that, right? So you would activate your incident management team, and maybe you hear about it because all of your team, 1, 2, and 3, if you have a 3 backup, are all get Notify New York. So you all know this is happening. So maybe somebody lets the incident manager know, or the incident manager already knows. So you're notified and you're briefed of what's happening, or you educate yourself on what's happening in the external environment. The next thing is that you're ensuring, so you're notified, then you want to make sure of all the life safety. Let's talk about safety. Is everybody okay on site if it happened on site? Or if it's an impending storm, there still might be safety issues. Maybe we're planning a big event and we're having people fly in from all over. We're going to need to cancel that now. So whatever those immediate life safety issues are, first think about that. And then the next thing is, as soon as possible, you're deciding, how many of my team members do I want to pull in for this event at this time? And then you notify them. And in most cases, your first meeting, and probably all your meetings, are going to be virtual, because you're going to have probably folks from all around. Even if you have a few on site, you want to have the capacity of doing virtual meetings. All right, so Rebecca, I think I set you up for for now continuing the journey of managing this incident through recovery. So I am going to put myself on mute. I'm going to first of all give controls back to Rebecca.
Okay, so now we're gonna take a few minutes to talk through what it looks like when you're actually trying to manage an incident and what is important to keep in mind. As Annie really spoke about earlier, this is a time where things are changing rapidly, where you start off pretty unstable, that things are changing. You're responding to small crises that are the impacts from whatever that incident or emergency was, right? So you're constantly um, adapting and changing and making decisions and changing those decisions, setting priorities, and then resetting your priorities. What are your objectives? And through this all, it's important to come together and be communicating really effectively with your team, the team that Annie spoke about, your incident management team, but also, of course, speaking to your external partners, all of your staff, all of your clients, families, and letting them know about the changes that are happening. It's really essential in all phases that Annie talked about, but especially here where things are changing so rapidly. It's important to make sure that communications is really strong. One of the ways that we've tried to help you is to create a tool for you. And I'm going to pull that up for you now so we can take a look at it. I'm having trouble finding it. Okay. Sorry, guys, I don't have it up. So I'm gonna to figure out how to bring it up. Okay. Great. Okay, so one of the tools we've created is the incident management team meeting template. And that is really a great tool.
We can't see it back.
Uh,
So maybe Jason, we'll stop. We'll have to just cut this piece if that's okay.
Okay. Starting to record. 1, 2, 3.
Great. Thank you, Annie. So now, yeah, we're going to take a few minutes to really look at what it's like to manage an incident and what are some of the key things that need to be taken into account and really focus on during this phase. I mean, there's lots of things going on. Your programs are being impacted. The environment outside is impacted. Your clients may be impacted. Your staff may be impacted. So there's a lot of moving parts here. And so some of the key things we want to bring your attention to that will help to manage the situation, this kind of chaotic, difficult situation, is these key things here that we've listed. One, and Annie's talked a lot about bringing your emergency management team together, but then having a regular way that you're coming together to meet and to share information so that you are aware of the situation that's going on externally and internally, so that those decisions you're making and remaking and changing are based on the best information from all different parts of the organization, so that when you're setting your goals and you're setting your objectives for your organization, you're really doing it as a group. You're bringing in all the best information and you're able to really put together some goals that are going to really help you get through this phase where you're dealing with these new things that keep popping up and the impacts of the emergency, and move on to recovery. And underlying all of this is the key, which is communications. And this is communicating among your team, communicating with your staff, communicating with your clients, communicating with multiple sites, right? communicating with your external partners. And so as always, in all phases, we know that communications is always key, but really here where things are changing rapidly, this is really going to be a key for you. So how do we do this? One of the tools that we've created, I think, can really help with that. And I'm just going to share that with you now. We've created this Appendix 6. It's called, oh, I'm sorry, I shoved the wrong one. Appendix 9, the Incident Management Team Meeting Template. And this is, of course, a tool to help you with your meetings and can help you in every meeting that you have, make sure you're focusing in on the most important things. And so this can really use as a guide. So if you have a meeting at 6 o'clock in the morning, then you have a meeting at 12 o'clock and a meeting at 6 o'clock that evening, especially at the beginning, you'll probably have a lot of meetings because things are changing so rapidly and you're trying to respond to lots of different things. This can help you really hone in every single time on the really important key aspects that as a group you need to keep focusing in on to be able to make those important decisions and to be able to be adaptable to the changing situation. So let's look at what those key things are. One is to come together and talk about what is the situation right now? What's going on externally? Is there a storm about to occur or has it already occurred? Is there transportation that's out? Or is there a flooding situation? Are there a lot of people who across the city have been impacted and how does that change things? So really gathering that information and bring it into the meeting so everybody's on the same page. We call it a common operating picture, right? So everybody has the same information, understands where you're at. The other important part of this situational overview is really understanding what's going on in the organization. You're all going to be doing lots of different things. And so this is an opportunity to bring that together and talk about, okay, this is the things we've been working on the last few hours. We have a flooding situation in the basement. We're closing down one of our programs, right? These are the kinds of things you want to bring in. So just right at the start of the meeting, you really get a clear picture of what's going on. Then another thing we want you to keep thinking about, and every time you meet and every time you're kind of going through this phase, this is going to change as well. So what are the impacts? What is happening? And we look at that in a couple of different ways. So looking at what is happening, what's the impact to the community? So this might be things that have already happened or things that may happen, right? You're not, depending on what's going on and where you are in the emergency. How does this emergency impact your stakeholders, your staff, your clients, and other people that are important to your organization? And then what are the organizational impacts? What is the building looking like at this point? What are your other work sites looking like? What are the damages or the loss of your IT or your communication systems or power, right? Just kind of getting a sense of what are these different impacts. And one of the things we've done for this purpose is to put together, if you scroll down to the bottom, you can see we've laid out, giving you some samples of different kinds of impacts that may occur as a result of the emergency that you can take into account in your meetings, right? So maybe you want to use this part of the worksheet to just check off the things that you're noticing are happening in the community, that are happening for stakeholders and are happening for your organization. Or maybe you just want to use this as a guide and then you can put this information up in section B. But the important thing here is to be thinking about not just what is the impact to the staff or what is the impact to the clients, but really getting this bigger picture. What is the impact overall? Because what is happening in the community is going to impact what's happening to your stakeholders. What's happening to your stakeholders is going to impact how you're using your facilities and how the loss of communications and things like that might impact your stakeholders. So it's all connected. So it's good to kind of think in these broad terms. Another thing that we would recommend is then, as part of your meeting, is to have each group kind of reporting out what's happening. So you can have right here in this section in the template, we put 3 different groups. So we would have a group reporting out on infrastructure, supplies, and equipment, and looking at what are the impacts that have been happening, what's the effect of those impacts, right? So if there is flooding in the basement, what does that mean? Okay, well, that means that we can't use the basement, that some of the equipment has been flooded and is destroyed, that we can't access certain parts of some of our utilities, right? Those are the kinds of things that you could put in here. What are the actions taken? What have you done to try to resolve these issues? What kind of notifications have you had to make? And what are the resources that you're using to take care of the situation? Maybe you look at what you have available and what you're using, or maybe you're even starting to think about what you might need going forward. So each team is reporting. So this is the infrastructure supplies equipment team. You might have, right, Annie talked about the different positions in the IMT, they may be reporting out on different services. So if you have 3 people overseeing services, they can be reporting out and talking about both your critical services and your non-critical services, and what is the status? You know, how are you trying to make sure that you're carrying out those critical services despite all of the things going on with the emergency? And then for those non-critical services, how are you thinking about suspending them and for how long? And, you know, you start talking about those kinds of things. And that's where you really look at it. I want to just point out that I'm using these terms, critical services, non-critical services, and then even this third category, which is primary business functions. And we really delve into that in the emergency management plan template in section 5 in the continuity of operations. So we're not going to really get into that now, but I really encourage you to take a look at that, because that will help. That kind of gives you a process for how you determine what are your critical services, what are your non-critical services, and then what are those primary business functions that help you keep your organization going. So getting back to this template, which is for your IMT meeting, you're reporting out on the services, you're reporting out on these primary business functions, let's say like HR or payroll or IT, you're reporting out what is the impact and how you're being affected. And then finally, now that you've gathered all this information, you've taken it in, you see where things are, you really as a team now come together to figure out, all right, where do we want to go? How do we want to continue to work in the next, say, 6 hours or in the next 2 days, depending on where you are in the incident, and figure out what are the key decisions, what are the objectives, what are your goals, who's assigned to different tasks, and when should they get those done, and what's the goal for that? What are some things you want to continue to keep in mind in terms of longer term considerations? And then when is your next meeting location? So while this is just kind of like, you can see this, okay, this is our agenda for our meeting, it's really important because every time you're bringing your team together, you're taking a pause and you're really bringing all the information together so you can really assess it and then make a plan going forward. And these plans definitely are going to change as you go along. And what I want to do now is just kind of take a look at that timeline with you. So I'm going to come back. Okay, so in this phase, as you're managing the incident, I've been talking a lot about how chaotic and unstable it can be, and it really is like that in the first, few hours, few days. There's a lot of things happening, and really in this period, you really want to have your emergency management team coming together at least once a day, but probably a couple times a day, as I talked about before. And again, every time you come together, use that template to help you walk through so that you're really focusing on the key areas and getting a big picture of everything going on. Then as you go along, the days pass, sometimes the weeks, and you start to see some stabilization. So you're still having that the effect of the impacts of that disaster, but you're starting to get things back online. There's programs are starting to run again, maybe a little bit better. There's less of these like emergency crises that keep popping up. And then you might start to meet with your incident management team, maybe once a day. And then as you continue going over the weeks and then maybe even to a couple months, you really can as you keep stabilizing your organization, that emergency management team will just keep meeting maybe fewer and fewer times. It's less important because things aren't changing as rapidly. So you don't need to meet as frequently. As you kind of keep moving and progressing and getting more and more stable, you're really starting to move out of that incident management phase where you're responding to the impacts of the disaster and really starting to move into the recovery phase where you're really starting to look at, okay, what are the things we really need to put in place now in order to get back to our normal operations? So whether that's, getting financially, putting things in place financially, or doing some kinds of reconstruction or rebuilding or maybe purchasing things, those kinds of things start to be more of a recovery operation. And usually then we go away from that model of using the incident management team, and you can really appoint maybe a recovery director who then is part of your larger organizational structure, who reports in, and it just kind of gets absorbed into the way you normally operate as an organization. So you move away from the team and you kind of start moving back to normal with this one position that's really focusing and trying to make sure that the recovery process is smooth. So you can really see that over the phase, it's all about becoming more and more stable and moving towards getting back to normal. So as you're moving out of that stage, and you're going into the recovery stage, we really want to highlight how important it is at this point to start looking and evaluating how the response went. And from there, you want to start looking at how can you improve your emergency management program and your plans and your procedures and things like that. So we're going to take a few minutes to talk about that today as well. The process for evaluation is probably very similar to other evaluations you have done. But as Annie noted earlier, a lot of this is happening in a more condensed way. So one of the things we really emphasize is that this process gets started pretty quickly once you move out of that incident management phase, because you may start to lose the impetus for getting this done. And it's really important in order to grow your program. So the process starts with just making a plan for how you're going to evaluate the last response. And you will then move into gathering feedback. So when we talk about gathering feedback, we really want to make sure that anybody who is working with your organization, involved with your organization, that was impacted by this emergency is able to give you some feedback and let you know how your organization did, to let you know about what went well and what are things that didn't go so well and that need to be addressed in the future. You want to put together a process for really gathering that feedback, and then when you get it in, to organize it and then analyze it. And then from there, through the analysis, maybe you have some meetings, maybe you bring some departments together. You start looking at, okay, let's figure out how we can make things better. And you start creating that roadmap using the project management plan, which we'll look at in a second. And then you start doing it and you start making changes, and little by little, you will start to improve your program and your plans, so that if something like this emergency or some other emergency were to happen in the future, maybe it would go a little bit better next time. So as we've gone through this process many times, there are a few things that are really help to make it a successful process. One, like I said, is to start as soon as possible. As soon as a disaster kind of slows down and transitions back into normal operations, people kind of get swept away and going back to normal. And it's often hard to pull everybody back Sometimes staff move on, sometimes volunteers aren't available anymore. So starting as soon as possible will also, keep things fresh and also make sure you get input from everybody that was involved, which we really emphasize is so important. It's not only important for informationally, so you can really get the full picture of what went right, what didn't go so right, but it also gives people that opportunity to participate and to share their experience and to be part of the change process. And that can be really important as well. And especially after a very difficult emergency or disaster, we find that that can be really healing and helpful to be part of the change process. One other thing that's really important is to offer lots of opportunities to give feedback. Sometimes for, what we want to really get is honest feedback. And sometimes people can't do that if they need to stand in front of their supervisor, they need to be in front of other people. So making sure there's some anonymous ways to provide feedback, like maybe through a survey or through different forms, that is a great opportunity. And then you can also have maybe some formal sessions. You can organize by topic or maybe organize by your department, bring people together and start talking through what some of their experiences were and ways that they think it can be improved. So having lots of different ways to get that feedback is really important. And then once you get that feedback, having a way to really use it and take it to move forward. It's nothing worse than somebody giving you all their opinion, their feedback and everybody having meetings and talking about how things can get better, and then it doesn't happen and it just gets lost. So we want to encourage you to have a strong project management approach as well. And we'll share with you some of the tools we have to help you with that. And then finally, we want to point out that you may have people who do this all the time in your agency, or maybe you have just external partners who can help you put together a really strong process for evaluating how the response went. Okay, so one of the tools we've created that I'm going to share with you now, I'm going to just pull it up, is the after action report template. And this is a way that you can capture and document everything that occurred, at least the highlights and the important things that occurred during this emergency or incident. So this tool is part of all the tools we've provided on the website. And I'm just going to go through it a little bit now. So the first part is just kind of putting in the generic information. What was the incident type? When did it start? When did it end? When did the review start? And who wrote the report? This part here, part one, is really important. It doesn't have to be long, but you just want to kind of capture the really important things about the incident. What happened? What were some of the key time markers? What was the impact to your services and to staff? Were there any injuries or things to report along that nature? And was there any damage or loss as a result of the incident? And any other kind of important things about just kind of painting the picture of what happened. The second part of this report would include what we call consolidated feedback and analysis. Part two would be where you're documenting all the information that came in from the people providing feedback. So you would capture here what people found to be significant activities or actions taken. What kinds of plans and protocols and procedures did people use during their response that were what was used? And then what, really importantly, these two things, right? What went well, what works, and how you responded as an organization. And then what were some of the challenges? What were things that didn't go so well that you did as an organization? And from these challenges is really where you're going to move into part three, which is identifying those things you want to improve. And we'll take a look at this emergency plan management tool that's mentioned here. But this here is really the point in which you're starting to identify how you're going to make improvements to your emergency plans, to maybe to your training, to exercising things, just to really start strengthening your program. And this last part, again, remember, this is a way of documenting what happened, right? And so part of this report could also include different attachments. So any meeting notes, like those IMT meeting notes, those would be great to include. Any photographs that were taken, you know, claims forms, things just that materials from the incident that you think are important and you want to kind of capture in this report so you have documentation and a way of keeping it all together going forward. I'm going to just switch back to the presentation, and I'm going to show you now the tool, another tool that we've provided, which is the emergency management planning tool. This is really like a project management tool, so a way to keep track of the things that you identified that you want to change. If you want to, you know, revisit part of your emergency management plan, you want to work on the communication section, on how you notify people. That's the kind of thing you can put in here, and you would identify these different actions, what the priority is, who is assigned to try to put these into place and to start making these changes happen. And you can put in other details as well.
So Becky, we can't see it.
Oh, you can't?
No.
Okay. Can you see it now?
So maybe Jason doing, no.
Okay.
Starting in 1, 2, 3.
Okay, what I want to show you now is a tool that we've made available to you on the HSC website, which is Emergency Management Planning Tool. And from after you do your evaluation and you put your ideas together about the things you want to change, this is where you can really capture them so that you have a way to move forward in a plan and you don't lose them, because like I said, as you move farther and farther away from the response, you know, and go back to normal operations, it's going to be easy to lose track of these things. So this is a tool to help you so that you can keep track of them and make progress on them little by little. So you can list the actions you want to take. If you want to maybe work on your communications plan, if you want to work on your notifications process, or if you want to work on your emergency response team, you can put that in here. You can set the priority, so where you want to really spend the time working first. And then you can assign this to someone and put some of the other details in there that will help you get this these tasks completed and these improvements made to your program and your plan. This sheet that we provided also has another sheet, which is really to look at if there are things specific to hazards that you want to improve in your plan and in your program. This is really where you can detail that. So if you need to have some procedures in place for maybe you just experienced an electrical disruption, but you really didn't have a plan for how you were going to do that. Now, as part of your evaluation, you've identified you want to put together some procedures specifically for that. And you can write that in here in this part of the tool. So there's 2 sheets in the tool, and you can really use them as best as you see possible. But again, it's just a way to capture this stuff, because we know so often these things get lost. We move on to normal operations. Another emergency happens, and then we find ourselves in the same situation, making some of the same mistakes that we did last time. And so we really encourage you to kind of follow through. And even if it's little by little, making these improvements, hopefully when something else happens, you'll have learned the lessons of the past and made these changes. So this kind of brings us to the end of the presentation today. And what I want to do is just re-emphasize that all these materials that we've gone over today are available to you on the HSC website. Section 3 of the emergency management plan template really is where you'll find all the stuff about incident management. So about the incident management team, about activating it, notifications, things like that. What are the roles and responsibilities? All of that is in Section 3. The appendices that we've talked about through this webinar are listed here. So we have Appendix 13, which was the chart that Annie shared, but she also shared different iterations of that. So you're able to take this and play with it a little bit to make it fit your organization. Appendix 8 gives you some of those ideas for each of those positions, some of the roles and responsibilities that might make sense for your organization to adapt and adopt. Appendix 9, the IMT meeting template, which is what we went over to help you in that emergency management phase to keep track of what's most important and to focus in on, what your goals are. Appendix 6 is the after action report. So that again is just to capture and document what happened in that emergency response and during that incident, and then help you identify how you want to improve, which is all captured in Appendix 7, the emergency management planning tool. So that wraps up our webinar for today. We hope that you will find this helpful, but we really want your feedback. So please feel free to reach out to us to let us know give us your input on this webinar, but also on the materials that we've discussed today or any of the other materials that you're looking at and hopefully using in your organization. Thank you so much for taking the time today, and we look forward to hearing from you. Have a good day.
Thank you so much, Rebecca, and thank you so much, Annie. We hope that you will join us for our future webinars in our continuing series of webinars on resiliency planning for human services nonprofit organizations. Thank you.